The blood-red horizon swallowed the sun as Reece Zimmerman stared down the barrel of his Colt .45 at the man who'd killed his brother. His finger tensed on the trigger, revenge just a heartbeat away when a woman's scream pierced the dusty Montana air. The distraction cost him everything. His shot went wide, the murderer escaped, and a stray bullet found an innocent bystander. The year was 1876, and Reece had just made the worst mistake of his life. Oh God, what have I done? Reece dropped his gun and ran toward the crowd gathering around someone on the ground outside the general store. The townspeople of Silver Creek parted as the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy pushed through, his spurs jangling with each desperate step. A young woman lay crumpled on the wooden boardwalk, crimson spreading across her shoulder. Her copper-colored hair spilled from beneath a modest bonnet, and pain contorted her delicate features. Reece fell to his knees beside her. "I need a doctor," he shouted, his voice breaking. "Somebody get Doc Miller." The woman's eyes fluttered, open eyes the color of spring sage, and fixed on him with surprising clarity despite her pain. "You," she whispered. "It was you who shot." Shame flooded through him as he pressed his bandana against her wound. "It's my fault," he admitted, the words catching in his throat. "I never meant to hurt anyone but Blackwell." To his astonishment, her hand reached up to grasp his wrist. "Then let me help you make it right." Confusion replaced guilt for an instant. "Miss, I just shot you." "You need to rest, not worry about me." "I'm Ruby Thornton," she said through gritted teeth. "And I know Calvin Blackwell better than most. If you're hunting him, I suspect we have something in common." Before Reece could respond, Doc Miller arrived and took charge. "Get her to my office now." He barked. Reece gathered Ruby into his arms, marveling at how someone so fierce could feel so fragile. As he carried her down Main Street, her blood soaking into his shirt, he wondered what connection this mysterious woman had to the man who had destroyed his family. And why, despite the bullet he'd put in her shoulder, she was offering to help him rather than see him hanged. Doc Miller's office smelled of carbolic acid and whiskey. The gray-haired physician worked quickly, extracting the bullet from Ruby's shoulder while Reece paced the small waiting room, hat clutched in his hands. Sheriff Patterson had already come by, taking statements from witnesses and giving Reece a stern warning to stay in town pending investigation. "You're lucky she's not pressing charges," the sheriff had said, eyeing Reece with suspicion. "For now, I'm calling this an accident, but I've got my eye on you, Zimmerman." Hours passed before Doc Miller emerged, wiping bloody hands on his apron. "She's asking for you," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't approve. "She's lost blood, but the bullet missed anything vital. She's a lucky woman." Reece entered the recovery room with hesitation. Ruby lay on a narrow bed, her shoulder bandaged, her face pale but determined. She'd changed into a simple cotton nightgown, and a quilt covered her lower half. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, her voice stronger than he expected. "Close the door, please." He did as instructed, then awkwardly took the chair beside her bed. "Miss Thornton, I can't begin to apologize enough." "Save it," she interrupted. "I heard you mention Blackwell." "Calvin Blackwell," Reece nodded. "He killed my brother last month. I've been tracking him since." "And nearly killed me in the process," she added without rancor. "Calvin Blackwell is a monster who destroys everything he touches. He ruined my family too." "How?" Reece leaned forward, curiosity overcoming his shame. Ruby's eyes darkened. "He owned the bank that foreclosed on our ranch after my father died. My mother and I lost everything because of his manipulations. She died shortly after of heartbreak, I believe. I've been working at the Mercantile, saving every penny, trying to find a way to expose him." "I'm not interested in exposing him," Reece said flatly. "I want justice for Thomas." "Your brother," when Reece nodded, Ruby continued, "bullets won't bring him back, and they won't give you peace either." "What would you know about it?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. "More than you might think." She shifted, wincing as pain shot through her shoulder. "Blackwell doesn't work alone. He has a network. Kill him and someone else takes his place. But if we could gather evidence of his crimes, bring him to proper justice." Reece stood abruptly. "I appreciate your forgiveness, Miss Thornton, but I don't need a lecture on morality from someone I just met and shot." A smile surprisingly lit her face. Which is precisely why you should listen to me, Mr. Zimmerman. I have every reason to hate you, yet here I am offering partnership instead. Doesn't that intrigue you even a little? It did, though he was reluctant to admit it. This woman had a fortitude that impressed him, and if she knew things about Blackwell that could help him. What exactly are you proposing? He asked cautiously. Rest first, she said, eyelids growing heavy from Doc Miller's laudanum. Tomorrow we'll talk strategy. For now, know this: I've been gathering information on Blackwell for months. Names, dates, transactions, evidence that could put him away for good. As her eyes drifted closed, Reece found himself studying her face, the dusting of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. There was something compelling about Ruby Thornton beyond her connection to Blackwell. I'll be back tomorrow, he promised softly, though she was already asleep. Outside, the main street of Silver Creek bustled with afternoon activity. Reece headed for the Silverbuck Saloon, needing a drink and a room for the night. His original plan to kill Blackwell and move on had been derailed, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. The saloon was half full, mostly miners and cowboys seeking respite from the summer heat. Reece ordered whiskey and leaned against the bar, contemplating his situation. He'd been so consumed with vengeance that he hadn't considered other approaches. Could Ruby's way bring more satisfying justice than a bullet? You're the fella who shot that Thornton girl, said the barkeep, sliding a glass toward him. Town's talking. It was an accident, Reece said tightly. Heard Blackwell got away again. The barkeep, a bald man with an impressive mustache, lowered his voice. Nasty piece of work, that one. Not many would weep if he met an unfortunate end. Reece downed his whiskey. You know him? Everyone knows Blackwell. Owns half the businesses between here and Helena. Man like that makes enemies. And friends in high places, I'd wager. The barkeep nodded. Judge, mayor, territorial marshal, they're all in his pocket. That's why no one stands against him, even when everyone knows he's crooked as a dog's hind leg. This confirmed Reece's suspicions and Ruby's assertion that simply killing Blackwell wouldn't solve the bigger problem. He ordered another whiskey and a room for the night, then sat at a corner table, mulling over his options. By morning, Reece had made his decision. After a quick breakfast, he returned to Doc Miller's office, bringing fresh biscuits from the bakery as a peace offering. Ruby was sitting up in bed, her hair braided over one shoulder, looking remarkably improved despite the sling supporting her injured arm. She eyed the biscuits with appreciation. A man who brings breakfast, she said with a hint of amusement. Perhaps I was shot by a gentleman after all. Reece felt heat rise in his face. At 32, he was hardly a blushing youth, but something about Ruby Thornton unsettled him in ways he couldn't quite define. He set the biscuits on the small table beside her. I've been thinking about what you said, he admitted, about bringing Blackwell to justice properly. And, I'm listening. Tell me what you know and what you think we should do. Ruby's smile was triumphant. Help me get dressed first. I can't strategize in a nightgown. Reece's eyes widened. I'll wait outside. Don't be ridiculous. I need help with buttons, unless you'd prefer I call Doc Miller away from his other patients. After an awkward negotiation involving much throat clearing and averted eyes, Ruby was dressed in a simple blue calico dress, her injured arm carefully arranged in its sling. They sat together at Doc Miller's small desk, Ruby's notes spread before them. Blackwell's operation extends beyond just the bank, she explained. He's involved in smuggling, land theft, and I suspect murder. My father began investigating him when several of our neighbors lost their ranches under suspicious circumstances. And you think that's why your father died? Reece asked. Ruby's expression hardened. My father's accident happened the day after he met with a territorial investigator. The investigator also died mysteriously a week later. Reece leaned forward, examining the meticulously kept journal entries and newspaper clippings Ruby had collected. This is impressive work. Thank you, she said, a hint of pride coloring her voice. But it's not enough for a conviction. We need irrefutable proof, ideally Blackwell's own records. Which would be where? His private office above the bank in Helena. I've never been able to gain access. Reece considered this. I've got skills that might help with that. Breaking and entering. Ruby raised an eyebrow. Let's just say my time in the war taught me more than how to shoot. Reece had served as a scout for the Union, skills that had served him well in his years as a bounty hunter afterward. But even if we get these records, who would act on them? You said yourself the local authorities are in his pocket. Ruby smiled, a clever light in her eyes. Not all of them. There's a federal marshal in Denver who's been building a case against corruption in the territories. I've corresponded with him, but he needs solid evidence before he can act. For the next hour, they formulated a plan. Reece would travel to Helena, posing as a wealthy investor interested in territorial opportunities. Meanwhile, Ruby would recover and prepare their documentation for the federal marshal. Once Reece obtained the evidence from Blackwell's office, they would rendezvous and take everything to Denver. It's risky, Reece said finally. If Blackwell recognizes me, he won't, Ruby assured him. He only deals with the wealthy and connected. A ranch hand like yourself would be beneath his notice. And what about you? You should be resting, not, I've been resting for too long, she interrupted fiercely. Every day Blackwell remains free is another day he destroys more lives. My shoulder will heal, others might not be so fortunate. Reece studied her determined face and found himself admiring her tenacity. All right then, partners, he extended his hand. Ruby's smaller hand clasped his firmly. Partners. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, and Reece felt an unexpected connection, a shared purpose that went beyond revenge or justice. He quickly released her hand, uncomfortable with the sudden awareness. I'll leave for Helena tomorrow, he said, standing. You focus on getting stronger. Reece, she called as he reached the door. It was the first time she'd used his given name. Be careful. Blackwell is more dangerous than you know. He tipped his hat. I always am, Ruby. The journey to Helena took 3 days on horseback. Reece used the time to refine his approach and prepare his disguise. He purchased new clothes in the last town before Helena, an expensive suit, polished boots, and a silk cravat that felt like a noose around his neck. He checked into the finest hotel in Helena, identifying himself as Richard Zeller, an investor from Chicago looking for opportunities in the burgeoning Montana territory. His first meeting with Calvin Blackwell came faster than expected. The banker himself approached Reece that very evening in the hotel dining room, introducing himself with the practiced charm of a predator. Mr. Zeller, is it? Blackwell extended his hand, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. Word travels fast when new money comes to town. I'm Calvin Blackwell, president of Frontier National Bank. Reece shook the offered hand, fighting the urge to break the fingers that had signed the order for his brother's death. Blackwell was shorter than Reece had imagined, with meticulously groomed silver hair and an expensive suit. Only the hardness in his pale blue eyes betrayed the ruthlessness beneath the veneer of respectability. A pleasure, Reece replied smoothly. I've heard your name mentioned as someone to know in these parts. Indeed, perhaps you join me for brandy after dinner. I'm hosting a small gathering of local businessmen who might interest you. The invitation was perfect, exactly what Reece had hoped for, but hadn't expected so quickly. I'd be delighted. That evening found Reece in Blackwell's opulent home on the outskirts of Helena, mixing with the territory's wealthiest citizens. He played his role with care, expressing interest in mining ventures and land development while gathering information about Blackwell's operations. The banker seemed to take a particular interest in Reece, introducing him to key associates and hinting at special opportunities for those with capital to invest. You've come at an opportune time, Mr. Zeller, Blackwell said as they stood smoking cigars on his veranda. I'm expanding my banking operations throughout the territory. New investors with your credentials are always welcome. I prefer to understand the full scope of any venture before committing funds, Reece replied. Perhaps a tour of your operations would be in order. Blackwell studied him for a moment before nodding. Of course, visit my office tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. Perfect. Back in his hotel room, Reece recorded everything he'd learned in a letter to Ruby. Blackwell's network was even more extensive than they'd realized, with connections to the territorial governor and several judges. The man operated with complete impunity, secure in his political protection. The next day, Reece arrived at Frontier National Bank precisely at 2. Blackwell gave him a thorough tour of the facility, explaining his vision for territorial development with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to seducing investors. The banker's private office occupied the entire top floor of the building, a lavish space with leather furniture, oriental carpets, and a massive oak desk. "Impressive operation," Reece commented, noting the large safe behind the desk and the filing cabinets lining one wall. "You've built quite an empire." "The territory rewards men of vision," Blackwell replied, "men who aren't afraid to seize opportunities when they appear, even if those opportunities belong to others," Reece asked, unable to keep a slight edge from his voice. Blackwell's smile cooled. "Business requires decisive action, Mr. Zeller. The weak inevitably give way to the strong. It's the natural order of things." "Indeed," Reece murmured, memorizing the room's layout for his planned return that night. "Some might call that philosophy Darwinian." "I call it American progress," Blackwell countered. "Now, shall we discuss investment opportunities?" For the next hour, they reviewed various ventures Blackwell was developing. Each one, Reece noted, involved acquiring land from struggling ranchers and farmers at fractions of their worth. It was exactly as Ruby had described systematic theft disguised as business. "I'll need time to consider these proposals," Reece said when Blackwell finally finished his pitch. "Perhaps we could meet again in a few days, of course." Blackwell escorted him downstairs. "I have business in Butte until Saturday. Shall we say Monday morning?" This was perfect, better than Reece had hoped. With Blackwell out of town, accessing the office would be simpler. "Monday it is." That night, Reece waited until well after midnight before making his move. Dressed in dark clothing, he approached the bank from the alley, picking the lock on the rear door with practiced ease. The banking floor was silent and dark, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through the windows. Reece moved silently up the stairs to Blackwell's office, his years as a tracker making his footfalls whisper quiet despite the building's creaky floors. The office door presented more of a challenge, but within minutes, he was inside. Working by the light of a small, hooded lantern, Reece began with the filing cabinets. Most contained routine bank business, but in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, he found what he sought, a leather ledger separate from the bank's official records. Its pages detailed bribes, threats, and manipulations that had built Blackwell's empire. Next came the safe. Using skills learned from a safecracker he'd once tracked and subsequently befriended, Reece worked the combination lock methodically. The satisfying click of the mechanism releasing sent a surge of triumph through him. Inside, he found not only cash and valuables, but documents that would prove Blackwell's corruption beyond any doubt, including correspondence with officials accepting bribes. Reece carefully copied key pages from the ledger and took several of the most incriminating letters, leaving everything else as he'd found it. As dawn approached, he slipped out of the bank, evidence secured in an oilskin packet inside his shirt. He returned to his hotel only long enough to pack his belongings, then checked out, claiming a business emergency in Denver. By sunrise, he was riding south, eager to return to Silver Creek and Ruby with his findings. Ruby's recovery had progressed more quickly than Doc Miller expected. Within a week of Reece's departure, she was back in her small rooms above the Mercantile, her arm still in a sling but her determination undiminished. She continued organizing their documentation while awaiting word from Reece, anxiety growing with each passing day. On the morning of the 10th day, Ruby was arranging flowers in her modest sitting room when a knock sounded at her door. Her heart leaped, hoping it was Reece, but caution made her check through the small window first. A stranger stood in the hallway, a well-dressed man with a familiar, arrogant bearing that immediately put her on guard. "Who is it?" she called, although she already suspected the answer. "Calvin Blackwell, Miss Thornton. I believe we have mutual acquaintances to discuss." Ruby's blood ran cold. How had Blackwell found her? What had happened to Reece? She glanced at the derringer she kept in a drawer nearby, then straightened her shoulders. Running would only confirm her guilt. "One moment," she called, retrieving the small pistol and concealing it in the folds of her skirt before opening the door. Blackwell stood with two burly men flanking him, hired muscle, whose brutish faces reflected their profession. The banker himself looked immaculate in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, his smile coldly pleasant. "Miss Thornton," he said with a slight bow, "may we come in?" It wasn't really a request. The men pushed past her into the room, one stationing himself by the window while the other checked the adjacent bedroom. Blackwell remained standing, examining her humble quarters with barely disguised disdain. "Your associate, Mr. Zeller, or should I say Zimmerman?" "Proved disappointingly predictable," Blackwell said, removing his gloves methodically. "Breaking into my office, stealing my private documents, as if I wouldn't have safeguards in place." "I don't know what you're talking about," Ruby replied, her fingers tight around the derringer hidden in her skirt. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwell? Please, let's dispense with the pretense. Your crusade against me has been charming but ultimately futile. I know you've been collecting information, corresponding with the federal marshal in Denver." He smiled at her shock. "Yes, I have friends in the postal service too. Where is Reece?" she demanded. "Currently enjoying my hospitality at her remote hunting cabin." "My men were quite thorough in recovering my property, though Mr. Zimmerman proved surprisingly resilient." Blackwell's smile thinned. "He'll live provided you cooperate." Ruby's mind raced. "What do you want?" "Everything you've collected, every scrap of paper, every note, every letter. And your written confession that you falsified evidence in a malicious attempt to defame me, driven by bitterness over your father's financial failures." "And if I refuse?" Blackwell sighed as if disappointed by her naivety. "Then Mr. Zimmerman's sister in Kansas will receive his body by freight wagon. I understand she's his only remaining family. Such a tragedy to lose another brother." Ruby's hands trembled with rage. "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman, Miss Thornton. Now, where are your records?" For a moment, Ruby considered using her derringer, but the odds were impossible. Even if she managed to shoot Blackwell, his men would kill her instantly. And then Reece would die too. "They're in the false bottom of the trunk in my bedroom," she said quietly, hating herself for surrendering but seeing no alternative. Blackwell nodded to one of his men, who disappeared into the bedroom. Sounds of searching followed. "You won't get away with this forever," Ruby said, desperate to keep him talking while she considered her options. "Others will see what you are." "Others see what I allow them to see," Blackwell replied coolly. "A pillar of the community, building civilization in this wilderness. You and Zimmerman are simply bitter failures, lashing out at success you couldn't achieve yourselves." The henchman returned with a stack of papers and Ruby's journal. "This everything, boss," Blackwell flipped through the materials. "It appears comprehensive. Now, Miss Thornton, your confession." He produced paper, pen, and ink from his coat and placed them on her small table. "Write exactly what I tell you, or Zimmerman dies slowly." Ruby sat, taking up the pen with shaking hands. As Blackwell dictated a confession that painted her as a vindictive liar, she wrote, buying time, praying for a miracle she didn't expect. The miracle came in the form of a tremendous crash as her sitting room window shattered. Something small and smoking sailed through the opening, exploding into dense, acrid smoke that instantly filled the room. "What the devil?" Blackwell's exclamation was cut short as gunfire erupted from outside. Ruby dropped to the floor, crawling toward the door as the henchman shouted in confusion. Through the thickening smoke, she saw Blackwell stumbling toward the exit, clutching her papers. She lunged, grabbing his ankle and sending him sprawling. The documents scattered across the floor as Blackwell kicked viciously at her face. "You little," he began, but a massive figure burst through the smoke-filled doorway, tackling him with bone-crushing force. "Ruby," Reece's voice called through the chaos. "Get out." She scrambled to gather the scattered papers, eyes streaming from the smoke. Outside, more gunfire sounded. Ruby stuffed the documents into her bodice and crawled toward the door, emerging into the hallway gasping for fresh air. Behind her, sounds of struggle continued in the smoke-filled room. One of Blackwell's men staggered out, blood streaming from a head wound. Ruby kicked his legs from under him, sending him tumbling down the stairs. Moments later, Reece emerged, dragging a semi-conscious Blackwell. Blood trickled from a cut on Reece's forehead and his shirt was torn, revealing dark bruises beneath, but his eyes burned with fierce triumph. "You're alive," Ruby breathed, resisting the urge to throw her arms around him. "Barely," he grimaced, "had some unexpected help." He nodded toward the street below, where Sheriff Patterson and several deputies had Blackwell's men at gunpoint. Turns out the sheriff's been suspicious of Blackwell for years, just needed someone to give him a reason to act. "How did you escape the cabin?" Reece's lip curled. "Blackwell's men got careless. I've escaped from worse places than a hunting cabin." He tightened his grip on Blackwell's collar. "Let's get this snake to jail. The federal marshal is already on his way from Denver." As they descended the stairs, Blackwell regained enough awareness to snarl, "This changes nothing." "My associates are being rounded up as we speak," Sheriff Patterson interrupted, approaching with handcuffs. "Your empire's crumbling, Blackwell. The telegraph's been busy today." Ruby watched as the sheriff secured Blackwell's wrists, a strange mixture of emotions washing over her. 3 years of fear, anger, and grief seemed to lift as the man who had destroyed her family was led away. "You're hurt," she said softly to Reece, noticing how he favored his left side. "Nothing permanent," he assured her, though his face was pale beneath its tan. "What about you? Did he hurt you?" "No," she said, extracting the crumpled papers from her bodice. "And we still have everything we need for the federal marshal." Reece's eyes darkened with something beyond concern or relief, something that made Ruby's heart quicken despite the chaos around them. "I thought I might be too late," he admitted. "When they caught me at the bank, I was certain Blackwell would come after you next." "How did you know where to find me?" "I didn't. Sheriff Patterson did." Reece nodded toward the lawman, who was supervising as deputies loaded Blackwell into a prison wagon. "I got back to town this morning and went straight to him with what I'd found." Turns out he's been building his own case against Blackwell, just waiting for solid evidence. Ruby felt a surge of vindication. "All this time I thought everyone was either afraid of Blackwell or in his pocket." "Most were," Reece acknowledged, "but not all." "Come on, the doctor should check you over." "I'm fine," she protested, though her shoulder throbbed where Blackwell's man had slammed her against the wall. "You're the one who looks ready to collapse." His lips quirked in a weary smile. "Always the worrier." "Only about people I care for," she replied without thinking, then flushed as Reece's eyes widened slightly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities, until Sheriff Patterson approached, breaking the spell. "Miss Thornton, I'll need your statement when you're feeling up to it," the sheriff said, "and those documents, if you don't mind." Ruby handed over the papers. "Everything's there, Sheriff. 3 years of evidence." Patterson nodded appreciatively. "Mighty fine detective work." "Both of you should get some rest now. There'll be plenty of time for questions later." As the sheriff departed, Ruby turned back to Reece, suddenly uncertain. Their shared mission was effectively complete. What would happen now? "You should lie down," she said, gesturing toward the damaged building behind them. "My rooms are a disaster, but Doc Miller would actually," Reece interrupted gently. "I thought we might talk about what comes next." Ruby's heart fluttered. "Next, after Blackwell's trial." "After justice is done," he hesitated, uncharacteristically tentative. "I've been thinking about settling down, finding a place to build something permanent." "You're not going back to bounty hunting?" she asked, surprised. Reece shook his head. "That life feels empty now." "I started it to find meaning after the war, but it's lonely work." "And what would you do instead?" Ruby asked, hardly daring to hope he meant what she thought he meant. "I noticed your family's old ranch is still abandoned," he said carefully. "With Blackwell gone, the bank might be persuaded to sell it back at a fair price." Ruby's breath caught. "The Triple T, but it would take so much work to restore." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Reece said softly, "especially with the right partner." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond business arrangements. Partner, Ruby echoed, a smile beginning to bloom. Reece reached out, hesitantly taking her hand. I know it's sudden and maybe I'm presuming too much, but these past weeks working with you, getting to know you. I've never met anyone like you, Ruby Thornton. Is this a proposal, Mr. Zimmerman? She asked, her voice teasing despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Not yet, he admitted with a wry smile. I figure a woman like you deserves proper courting first, but it's an intention. A beginning, if you're willing. Ruby looked into his eyes that had first met hers across a gun barrel and saw a future she'd stopped believing possible. I'm willing, she said simply, more than willing. His smile transformed his face, erasing the hardness that years of vengeance had etched there. Mindful of her injured shoulder, Reece drew her gently against him, his forehead resting against hers. It's strange, he murmured. I came to Montana hunting a killer and instead found a partner, Ruby finished for him, in all things. Their lips met, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty. Around them, Silver Creek continued its bustling afternoon business, townspeople cleaning up after the excitement, life returning to normal though for Ruby and Reece. Nothing would ever be quite the same again. The weeks that followed brought justice at last. The federal marshal arrived with a team of investigators who systematically dismantled Blackwell's criminal network. The banker himself, faced with overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his political protectors, eventually confessed to orchestrating Thomas Zimmerman's murder, along with dozens of other crimes. Ruby and Reece testified at the trials, their evidence proving crucial to securing convictions not just against Blackwell, but against corrupt officials throughout the territory. When it was over, Blackwell received a life sentence in a federal penitentiary, while his associates faced varying terms depending on their involvement. As autumn painted the Montana hills in gold and crimson, Ruby stood on the porch of the newly restored main house at the Triple T Ranch. Reece had been true to his word, successfully negotiating with the new bank management to purchase the property at a fair price. Together, they had spent the summer rebuilding fences, repairing buildings, and restocking the herd with promising cattle. Penny for your thoughts. Reece's voice came from behind her as his arms encircled her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar over the months of their courtship. Ruby leaned back against his solid chest. Just thinking about how much has changed. A year ago, I was a shop girl with a hopeless vendetta. Now you're a rancher with a thriving vendetta, he teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. She laughed, turning in his arms to face him. A successful vendetta, thank you very much, and a prosperous ranch, thanks to you. Thanks to us, he corrected. Your father taught you well. I'd be lost without your knowledge of cattle breeding. The mention of her father brought a bittersweet smile to Ruby's lips. He would have liked you, I think, once he got past the part where you shot me. Reece winced. Will you ever let me forget that? Probably not, she admitted cheerfully. It makes such a good story to tell our grandchildren someday. His expression softened and he reached into his pocket. Speaking of someday, Ruby's breath caught as he withdrew a small velvet box. After months of courtship picnics by the creek, dances in town, long talks by firelight, the moment she'd been anticipating had arrived. Reece dropped to one knee on the porch boards, his expression a mixture of certainty and vulnerability that made her heart swell. Ruby Thornton, when I came to Montana, I was a man consumed by revenge with nothing to live for beyond the next day. You showed me a different path, one with purpose, justice, and hope. He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife. Tears blurred Ruby's vision as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Reece slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to capture her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. When they finally parted, both breathless, he kept her close in the circle of his arms. I love you, he murmured against her hair. Never thought I'd say those words to anyone again after losing my family. I love you too, she replied, marveling at how 3 simple words could contain such profound truth. Though I'm still not sure how it happened, you did shoot me after all. Reece laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest against her cheek. And you offered to help me make it right. I'd say we managed that, Ruby said, looking out over the land that had been her childhood home, now renewed through their joint efforts. More than right, Reece agreed, following her gaze to the setting sun painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. We made something entirely new. Their wedding took place the following spring, with the entire town of Silver Creek in attendance. The Triple T Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine cattle, fair business practices, and the remarkable couple who ran it, the former bounty hunter and the determined woman who had turned a bullet wound into a second chance. Over the years, they welcomed 3 children who grew up strong and principled under their parents' guidance. The story of how their parents met became family legend, how a stray bullet had brought together 2 wounded souls seeking justice, and how together they had found healing, purpose, and a love that transformed them both. On quiet evenings, Ruby and Reece would often sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had reclaimed and rebuilt together. Sometimes they spoke of the past of Thomas, of Ruby's parents, of the darkness they had overcome. More often, they spoke of the future of their children's prospects, of the growing ranch, of the community they had helped strengthen through their example of resilience and integrity. And sometimes, they simply sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined, marveling at the unlikely journey that had brought them together. From a moment of tragic mistake had grown a partnership, then friendship, then a love that sustained them through every challenge life presented. "It's still my fault, you know," Reece would occasionally tease, tracing the small scar on Ruby's shoulder. "That we met the way we did." And Ruby would always smile, pressing her lips to his with the same certainty she had felt that very first day. "Then I'm still helping you make it right," she would reply, "and I always will."